Hello, it's me on this foggy Monday morning toward the end of January. Yes, so Donald Trump has appointed Tony Blair to the Gaza Peace Board. Now, Tony Blair is rather a controversial, character, I was going to say. And he certainly is more of a caricature than a character. As Prime Minister of the UK, it could be reasonably argued that he was very forward-thinking. So forward-thinking, in fact, he was willing to ditch everything that the left was and start this experiment of the liberal left. A geopolitical experiment that we're currently paying the price for. A highlight of the Blair premiership, or lowlight, depending on how you look at it, would be the Iraq War. It was largely recognised that Blair was trying to recreate the magic that Thatcher had created in liberating Argentina from the Argentinians. And so to become the great statesman that he always wanted to be, he took us into the Iraq War under the guise of WMDs, those weapons of mass destruction. Hugely controversial in itself, because the program of going into that war and then being in that war, and more importantly the events leading up to that war, were mired in controversy, not the least of which was Dr. David Kelly. My notes here: an inquest never fully happened. He was found dead in a country field with his wrists cut. Death by suicide. But was it death by suicide? Subsequently, investigations were carried out, and it seems as though the pieces of the puzzle didn't neatly fit together. Dr. David Kelly produced the WMD dossier. It is said that the official report on the Iraq War, the report that got us in to the war in the first place, had been sexed up, and this was an accusation made by Dr. David Kelly himself. He was, it seems, a lone but very powerful voice, stating clearly that this idea that the weapons of mass destruction that Iraq held was in fact not quite what it seemed. Strenuous efforts were made to keep him out of the limelight. The authorities knew that he would become a problem, and so decided to remove him from the picture. If you believe the rather conspiratorial idea that his suicide was in fact death by a nation state. Or would that be murder by a nation state? Anyhow, the poor man's dead, and many questions remain. There are many people for whom the Prime Minister, or rather ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair, is in fact a driven individual, caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, politically speaking, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And there are others who think that Tony Blair is quite simply evil incarnate. There was a film called The Writer starring Pierce Brosnan and Ewan McGregor, wherein Ewan McGregor plays the part of a young biographer trying to get inside the inner circle to discover the holy of holies of a Prime Minister played by Pierce Brosnan. Although not explicitly stated in the movie, many people think that the character is in fact Tony Blair. And the rather conspiratorial, espionage-like conceit of that movie is that the Prime Minister's wife is in actual fact his handler. And that brings us to Cherry Blair, Tony Blair's wife. Or as some individuals like to call her, Pete Doherty. There's a picture up there, do try and look it up. So, CIA handlers. I wonder where we've seen this story before, or this idea. So here's a thought. Let's just say that Cherry Blair was indeed Tony Blair's CIA handler. They're married, they have kids, have an entire life. And yet, underneath it all, underpinning it all, is this idea that his wife is employed by the Secret Service, that the marriage is a marriage of convenience. And there is some indication that Tony Blair, on a very personal level, isn't the straight, upstanding, heterosexual individual that he might appear. And Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, dare I say Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte Macron. We all know that there's a huge fuss being made over Brigitte Macron's genetic lineage. Would that be a good way of putting it? Allegedly. And so, if what I'm saying is true, and I will preface this by saying everything that I'm talking about now is alleged. I don't have any proof of this, of course, but what we do see emerging is a pattern. And if history has taught us anything about conspiracy, it's that it operates in patterns. And so this is the man that Donald Trump has appointed to the peace board at Gaza. Now, if there is a world in which Tony Blair manages to facilitate peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, I'm all for it. But the question has to be asked, at what price? Donald Trump wants to turn parts of Palestine into holiday resorts. And frankly, I can't think of anything that betrays the notion of peace more completely than turning a war zone, the ground of which has been stained by the blood of many individuals on all sides, into holiday apartments and beachfront properties. Let's just say Tony Blair does in fact become the soothing balm that that area of the world needs. In 10 years' time, we're going to look back on this when there's peace in Palestine and Israel, and the area has become a tourist hotspot, and there hasn't been a death for a decade. Is anyone really going to care? Peace is peace. If the killing stops, is that worth any price? My personal feeling is that as this unfolds, it's going to cause more and more controversy. The players in this rather horrific venture, and don't get me wrong, I'm all for peace, but let's see how this plays out, are all mired in personal disaster of one form or another. How much good can come of this venture for peace if the individuals concerned are at their very basis, at their very hearts, not who they appear to be? It seems to me the worst kind of geopolitics is being played out. The people who pull these global strings behind the scenes have agendas that we can only guess at. It's my opinion that this started with Margaret Thatcher here in the UK, back in the 80s. The long game was implemented, and we've seen it played out. When we look at the cast of characters involved in these global dubious adventures, we see many of them are all middle-aged. Older, in fact. How old was Klaus Schwab when Margaret Thatcher came to power? Where was he, and what was he doing? I believe he was a lecturer, wasn't he? But his path led him to where he currently is. And the place at which he finds himself is basically playing a Bond villain in a Stanley Kubrick-esque geopolitical thriller which will have a tragic and absurd ending. And I think it can credibly be argued that Trump, in some ways, is the most absurd character of all. Fighting for his personal and political life in a system in which he's grossly outnumbered. And so, did he appoint Tony Blair? Or was he told to appoint Tony Blair? One thing seems clear to me. History will not look upon this kindly. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. Do like, subscribe and share if you'd like. It does help the channel reach more people. And until next time, do look after yourselves.